Here's the only way Black Americans will receive reparations that no one's talking about. Hi, I'm Dr. Jahi, a certified indigenous jurist who specializes in getting Black Americans tax exempt and self-administer reparations. First, we must understand what reparations is at its core. Reparations means to repair. In order to properly be repaired, you must comprehend the full extent of an injury. So think of reparations as a surgeon. If a surgeon operates on your leg, but you have an arm injury, then that attempt at repairing will be unsuccessful. This is what's happening in Black America's fight for reparations, and this is why it's been unsuccessful thus far. But it's okay, because after watching this video, you will know how to 100% successfully get reparations and organize the right way to make sure that all parties who owe you are held accountable. So when it comes to reparations, we do not have to reinvent the wheel because success leaves clues. And when we think about historical atrocities, besides slavery, another group of people should come to mind. The brothers and sisters in the Jewish community. Instead of criticizing them, we can learn from them and follow their blueprint. But first, I got a question for you. Did you know that Germany denied Holocaust survivors compensation at first? Yup, just like they do to Black Americans in present day. We must understand the challenges they faced initially in their pursuit for reparations and how they adjusted to eventually getting them. Holocaust survivors face significant obstacles in receiving reparations due to a combination of political, economic, and social factors. Here are the main reasons why they were initially rejected. First, they just refused to take responsibility, and they claimed that they was just following orders. This created a lack of accountability for the Germany government, with no one willing to take responsibility for the reparations. This is the same thing Black Americans face in present day, with a lot of people making excuses like, man, that was long ago. Get over slavery. Why should I pay for what people did in the past? These are all attempts to undermine our claim, but it's okay because we should never depend on wrongdoers to right their wrongs, because we should be using strategy to force their hand. The second reason they was initially rejected, they argued that the country could not afford to pay reparations and claimed that they were struggling to rebuild their economy. This is similar to how they say the United States will go bankrupt if they paid Black Americans reparations. I hope you're noticing some patterns. And the third reason, please don't let this go over your head. The lack of a unified voice. Holocaust survivors lacked a unified voice due to them being scattered across the world. We can compare this to how scattered Black Americans are when it comes to unifying, especially with all these different ideologies. But I have a solution to that problem. We will make our claim based on identity, not ideology. When dealing with identity, we must understand that reparations is a legal matter, not a personal belief matter. So the identity we choose needs to be a political identity backed by local and international law, and it must be attached to human rights. Identifying as Black and African American, these are identities that the ones who owe us reparations put in place to ensure we never get reparations, because these identities are misnomers that's only attached to civil rights, not human rights. We must know the difference between civil rights and human rights. Civil rights are permissions that can be stripped away from you, while human rights are what you are born with. Think about it. Our ancestors marched and pleaded for civil rights, meaning that they was demanding them from their oppressor. If you demand something from someone and they give it to you, you're giving them the power to take away the very thing that they gave to you. But with human rights, these are what you're born with. And if anyone violate those, there will be consequences. Keep this in mind for when I break down how we tangibly get reparations. The identity I recommend for us is not only historically backed, but it's attached to a human rights framework. It also gives us the highest status on the land, and it enables us to get self-administered reparations on the front end and reparations, reclamation, and restitution on the back end. It also helps us operate autonomously just like the Jews did, which was the key to their reparations. Which brings us to the fourth and final reason why they were initially rejected. They lacked the nationality and proper nation to advocate on their behalf. Just waiting on a government to right their own wrongs is not very strategic. And they didn't receive reparations until they fully established themselves as a nation, which was Israel. Holocaust survivors did not receive compensation until they established themselves as a nation in 1948. This led to the Luxembourg Agreement 4 years later. The Luxembourg Agreement between Israel and West Germany was the first large-scale reparations agreement, and it heavily depended on Israel's status as a sovereign autonomous nation. This is the same route Black Americans have to take in order to receive reparations as well. Luckily, there's already an established nation in place for Black Americans to join that can advocate for their reparations, get them tax exempt, and get them self-administered reparations. Most of them just don't know it exists. And even if they did, there's a steep learning curve our people need to catch up to even understand how these things benefit them. Because we've been lied to from every angle, especially when it comes to our history. And we've established beliefs and identities based on these lies. That's why I'll be dedicating this YouTube channel to getting us up to speed. So make sure you like, comment, and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos. Now in this next segment, I'm about to expose all the things that's keeping Black Americans from receiving reparations. These things must be corrected or all of our efforts will go to waste. And all of these things need to be fixed internally. Remember, reparations means to repair. We must first repair ourselves via self-administered reparations to give us the right vehicle to receive reparations. So the first thing Black Americans need to understand is that they are not first-class citizens in the United States. And the citizenship they think they have is a second-class citizenship, or what I like to call an illusion of inclusion. This citizenship is really a slave ship, and I'm about to prove it. So first, we have to go back to the original Constitution. In the preamble where it says, "We the people," they were not talking about Black Americans. They was talking about white males and their offspring. That's why it also says in the preamble, "and our posterity," which means their future descendants. Then in Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3, it says some very important words that shouldn't be overlooked. It established the status of the people on the land. Pay attention. Representatives and direct taxes should be apportioned among the several states which may be included within this union, according to their respective numbers, which shall determine by adding the whole number of free persons, including those bound to service for a term of years, and excluding Indians not taxed, 3/5 of all other persons. Now the two statuses I want you to pay attention to is free persons and excluding Indians not taxed. See, most Black Americans, when they read that part, they automatically assume that they are the 3/5 of all other persons. But this is far from the truth. And learning how to comprehend this part will either free you or enslave you. See, us Black Americans was not the free persons, and here's how we know that. In short, because they had to pass the 14th Amendment. And here's what led to that. There was an infamous court case with a brother named Dred Scott. Dred Scott sued for his freedom, claiming he lived in a free territory where slavery was prohibited, making him legally free. And he filed this in a slave state, which was Missouri. And it eventually made it to the Supreme Court, where the judge ruled that Black Americans, whether free or not, were not considered citizens under the U.S. Constitution, and therefore could not sue in federal court. This case proves that blacks were not included in the Constitution, which led to the 14th Amendment. But here's the problem with the 14th Amendment that a lot of people overlook. It still didn't grant blacks the original Constitution citizenship. Check this out. In the Constitution, it says free persons, but in the 14th Amendment, they strategically took the word free out and just put persons, and then followed that with subject to the jurisdiction thereof. Meaning the 14th Amendment actually made Black Americans subjects. And here's the definition of a subject: someone who is under the power of another. So till this day, this is the second-class citizenship that all Black Americans are under. They are not free, they just have the illusion of freedom. But here's a hidden gem in the 14th Amendment and the original Constitution that most Black Americans look over. But it's actually the key to their freedom and autonomy. And this same thing was mentioned in the Dred Scott case as well, but it went over his head just like it goes over the majority of Black Americans' heads today. Pay attention. The 14th Amendment in the Constitution speaks about another status on this land, excluding Indians not taxed. But before I go further in depth on that, let me break down how bad being a subject to the government is. This is one of Nuremberg's laws enacted by Nazi Germany. In Article 1 of the Reach Citizenship Law, it says, and I quote, "A subject of the state is a person who belongs to the protective union of the Germany Reach. This law is the law that made Jews subjects to the Nazis, taking away their rights and making them second-class citizens. Sound familiar? I like to call the Nuremberg's Law an overt version of the 14th Amendment. They both make people subjects and second-class citizens. One was just more overt and brutal, while the 14th Amendment is more covert and gives one the illusion of inclusion and civil rights, but keeps the systematic hierarchy. Now let's address this Indians not tax thing. If you follow me on Twitter, or if I've ever shopped in a local store with you, you know me as the tax exempt guy. I'm able to operate tax exempt due to me understanding my proper political status and identity as a Black American. And this is all made possible due to that phrase, Indians not taxed. And because of this knowledge, I'm able to operate tax exempt with sales, property, and business. But not only that, I'm able to help all Black Americans become tax exempt as well. This is why you see a lot of Pan-African slander online when it comes to us Black Americans getting in tune with our indigenous identity. You might hear them call us pretendians and wabos. This is done by design because they don't want majority of us getting access to this type of information. As long as they can keep us believing that we're descendants of African slaves, they can keep us in a permanent second-class citizenship status and never have to be held accountable for reparations and restitution. This is why the African slave narrative is the main narrative that they teach us and indoctrinate us with in school. Why don't they teach us about the ancient Black people in America and how they are on the pyramid walls in America, and how America has the most pyramids, even more than Egypt, and has the largest one as well, which is Cholula. But instead they teach us about ancient Egypt. Or why don't they teach us about how Walter Plecker started a trend of reclassifying Indians to Negroes and colors? And we all know who the Negroes and colors are in history. This is purposely done to hide our true identity. Now let's connect this to the Dred Scott case we touched on earlier. In the Dred Scott case, the judge talked about two groups of people: African descendants of slaves and American Indians. This is what he said about African descendants of slaves. They, African slaves and their descendants, are not included and are not intended to be included under the word citizens in the Constitution. Now let's look at what he said about Indians. Unlike the Indian race, although they was uncivilized, they were yet a free and independent people governed by their own laws. And when we speak about American Indians, we're not talking about the Native Americans. Those people they show you in the movies and mainstream media, that's propaganda. Keep that in mind. Those are not the original Indians. So what make more sense to you? Operating under your indigenous status, where you can govern and make your own laws and be tax exempt, or continuing to be a 14th Amendment citizen that's subject to your oppressor? And listen to this. Remember when I said the Jews didn't get reparations until they operated as their own autonomous nation? This is the same thing we're able to do when we operate in our indigenous status. Look at this. UNDRIP Article 4. Indigenous peoples, in exercising their right to self-determination, have the right to autonomy or self-government in matters relating to their internal and local affairs, as well as ways and means for financing their autonomous functions. And based on self-determination, we have the ability to reject the misnomers they call us, like Black and African American, and rightfully identify in our indigenous status. Meaning operating in our indigenous status give us the right to operate in our own indigenous nations and jurisdictions. And not only that, us being indigenous give us an international identity that's supported by international law. See, the Jews didn't wait for their local governments to give them reparations. They brought their issues to an international stage once they were able to establish themselves as a nation. We can do this ourselves as well. And no, I'm not talking hypothetically either. I'm currently a part of an all-Black indigenous autonomous nation. We have our own courts, university, flag, jurisdictions, and 12 ministries of government. It's just an information gap in our community. And if you want to know more information about this, tap into my Patreon for things I can't say on here. And us being indigenous changed the conversation to us getting our land back as well. That's why I'm a big advocate of genealogy. Not the DNA test, but the records. A lot of us have land patents that we could tap into as well. And this also strengthens our claim for restitution. Here's the plan. If we could save 20% of black Americans, $20,000 in taxes yearly, by them being in their indigenous status, that's close to $200 billion extra we can have in our community to build up schools, hospitals, and other institutions. When the Jews united, they went from survivors to nation builders. Black Americans have the same potential. By forming a nation, you're not just asking for reparations, you're creating a foundation for generational wealth, autonomy, and independence. It's our turn to reclaim our identity, build our nation, and finally get what we owe.